it? Is it worth buying a property, doing it up and selling it to make profit? Can you make profit? So let's crack this one open. Hello, I'm David Giles, aka The Property Guy. I'm also the co-founder of Embark, a firm of the highest caliber estate agents and property managers throughout the Dorset area. I'm also a luxury property broker and a property investment and development consultant. I'm also a shite golfer, but a 10-pin bowling legend. But anyway, that's enough about me and my team. Today is all about working out, are refurbs worth it? Is it worth buying a property, doing it up and selling it to make profit? Can you make profit? So let's crack this one open. Now, I've done a little bit of public speaking at property investment events all over the country, and it would be fair to say that I've pissed off a huge number of people on this topic. And I think it's because, in fact, I know it's because they don't like the truth. They can't handle the truth. So before I get going, I just want to say to all those people that I offended both offline and online, from the bottom of my heart,
you can't handle the truth
about refurbs. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that you shouldn't buy property and that you shouldn't do a refurbishment project, because I'm not saying that you can't make money from it, far from it. But what's made all these people really want to punch me in the face, other than my general appearance, is when I explained to them how they could have made the same profit level that they did without all the blood, sweat, and tears and uncertainty that they poured into it. I think that's what really gets to them. So let's take a big deep dive into refurbs, and let me tell you how I think you should approach them. Now, going back to basic business, okay, we've got something called profit and loss. So the profit, what's the net profit? The net profit is the amount after all costs that you walk away with, right? So we have to focus on that. And with something as complex as buying a property, spending a lot of money on it, and then selling it, there's quite a lot of contributing factors and variables of how each part of that total profit is created. It's not just created through one strategy. I believe there are at least 6 ways to add net value to a proposed property project. So let's break them down one by one. Now, it would be foolish to believe that the act of simply refurbishing a property is going to be the sole reason for adding value. Certainly any net value, minimal if nothing. And I'm talking about let's say there's a property and everything is absolutely fine, but the kitchen itself needs replacing. So if you were to buy the property, let's say for 200,000, and the estate agent that valued it thought, well, do you know what, it's going to cost about £10,000 to put a new kitchen in here, they would say, well, you know, if it had a new kitchen, it would be worth 210,000. So let's put it on the market for 200,000. So someone comes along and buys it for 200,000. They refurbish the kitchen. They put a new kitchen in for £10,000, and now the property's worth 210,000. So there's no profit made there. Do you see what I'm getting at? So someone's refurbished that room, but they've not made any net profit from that room. That room, you know, they've just flatlined. They've had to spend £210,000, and now the property is worth £210,000. So as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, is that's refurbs. So whether you're just doing the kitchen or you're doing the whole house, whether you're putting new electrics, plumbing, bathrooms, kitchen, flooring, landscaping the garden, whatever it may be, whatever you're doing in this refurbishment, I do not believe that you can make a net profit from doing them. But come on, David, stop teasing us. How do you believe we make big net profits from property projects such as refurbs? Okay, so the first of 6 ways is BMV. This stands for below market value. So let's explain that. Now, let's say the property is worth 200,000. Don't worry what condition it's in. This could be a property that's in excellent condition. It could be a property that is in shite condition. That makes no difference in this example. So we've got a property that's worth a current market value of £200,000. Now, if we are able to negotiate and buy that property for, say, £175,000, well, we've just created £25,000 worth of profit simply by buying the property below market value. Now, this is the easiest strategy to make money through property projects, albeit you could argue the hardest, because there's not, in percentage terms, a significant amount of people that are going to be prepared to take such a low below market value offer for their property, when they probably have to don't wait much longer to get the full price, in this example, £200,000. And to give you a bit of an example on that, I've met quite a few people, and I won't mention names or specific projects, but I've got countless, hundreds of case study examples to back up my theory. But let's just keep with the same numbers that I've been using as an example. Now, that property at 200,000, let's say it needs completely refurbishing, and the estate agent would have gone round, looked at the property and gone, this property is probably going to cost somewhere in the region of £50,000 to get it up to a good standard. So the estate agent, they're not builders or tradesmen, so they're not going to get this right all the time, but they're going to get fairly close. They're going to go, right, this property is worth £250,000 done up. I think we could get 200,000 for it in its current condition, because it needs about £50,000 spending on it. Notice how, in this example, the estate agent hasn't factored in any profit margin for anybody. And this is because they know that there are lots and lots and lots of buyers out there seeking refurbishment opportunities, not necessarily to make a profit, just they want to put their own stamp on the property. They don't want to buy a property for 250,000 that's all done up, rip all the things out that they don't like about it, which is not their taste, and then spend another £50,000 on it to get it the way they like it, because they would spend £300,000 and actually the property's still only worth £250,000, but it's just been refurbished to a different taste. Do you see what I mean? So I've met people who, let's use these numbers as an example, that have bought a property for £200,000, needs fully refurbishing, but they've actually managed to negotiate a £25,000 below market value purchase. Could be that the owner was needing to sell the property quite quickly, and they were happy to take a £25,000 below market value offer to make that happen quickly. So they bought the property for £175,000. It was worth £200,000. They've spent £50,000 on it. They've sold the property for the current market value, refurbished, at £250,000, and then they've later claimed that they've made a £25,000 profit through the act of doing a refurb, buying a property, doing it up and selling it on. But they haven't, have they? No, they haven't. They made that £25,000 profit through the discount, the £25,000 BMV, below market value discount, that they'd already created at the time of acquisition. On the day of completion, they'd already locked in that £25,000, right? So the rest of the time, the rest of the money, that extra £50,000 and blood, sweat and tears of organising all that work, and then selling the property to make the same £25,000 profit. They're fooling themselves by believing that they created that £25,000 through all that extra work that they did. They made it on day one. They could have just sold the property. I mean, okay, we're using gross figures here, so they would have had to have paid a stamp duty to buy it and legal fees, and then state agency fees and legal fees to sell it. So they won't actually make £25,000, probably end up with 10,000. But I'm just explaining the principle of the actual act of refurbishing the property in this example, and hundreds of other examples that I've done case studies on, all result in the same. Now this one really pisses people off. The passage of time, okay? So property generally goes up in value, okay? It sort of does this. Let's go back to 1952. It goes up, down a little bit, up, down a little bit, up, down. But you see my hand's getting higher. This is what's happened. It's doubled 22, 23 times in the last sort of 70 years. So that's what property does. So some people are a little bit slower to get the works done on the property that they've bought. So they buy a property, they've been doing the work themselves, they spent maybe a year doing up the property. So let's do the same example. They bought it for £200,000, but they haven't spent £50,000 on it because they've actually been doing the work themselves, and it's typically an even split. Cost of materials, let's say, was £25,000 and the labour was £25,000. So they've spent £200,000. They spent £225,000 plus put in £25,000 worth of labour themselves. So now it's taken these guys a year to do it because they've done it on their own. They didn't want to spend £25,000 on other people's labour because they thought that was dead money. But over that 12-month period, the market may have gone up 10%. Now, in 2003 alone, as an example, in the sort of some parts of the pool area, pool in Dorset, and certain property types, they went up by about 30% in that 1 year in 2003, okay? So it just shows how the passage of time can add to your net profit. So, you know, an example, we say you bought the property for £200,000, it took a year to do it. That year it went up 10%, so that's £20,000. So the property is now worth £220,000, right? So, but they've made that £20,000 just through taking a year to refurbish the property. And it comes to the end and they sell the property for so they'll now be selling the property for £270,000 because it's taken a year longer, it's gone up 10%. So now they say, hey, look, we bought this property for £200,000, spent £25,000 on materials, and I sold it for £270,000. Right? They're going to claim that they made £45,000 from the act of doing the refurbishment, but they did not. They made £20,000 of that £45,000 doing nothing, sat on their arse, just letting the property market for the next 12 months go up £20,000. So they can't claim that £20,000 of that £45,000 was a result of doing the refurbishment. What about the other £25,000? Well, they did make it through doing the refurbishment, but they made it actually out of trading their time, blood, sweat and tears and labour of physically doing the refurbishment themselves. So they didn't make the other £25,000 through the act of refurbishing the property. They really just created a job for themselves. They could have gone and worked on any building site and got £150 a day and earned the same money. So it wasn't the act of doing the refurbishment, was it? Okay, number 3 is remodeling. So this can incorporate refurbishment. So if you buy a property for £200,000, it needs fully refurbishing, but also let's say it's got some remodeling options. It could be an awful floor plan, and you need to remodel the floor plan to make the entire property more appealing and therefore more valuable than it would be if you were just to refurbish it. So that could mean extensions as well. It could be, let's say, that It could be a 3-bedroom property with could be having like a double garage on the side, or just space for a double garage, and then you could extend over the top, and you've made a 3-bed house into a 5-bed house. So remodeling the property together with the refurbishment. Now, so when you take a property with a current status and you completely change it, so you bring it into a whole new model, now you're remodeling. Now we can make some net profit here, because we buy the property, it's set, needs work, it's 200,000. You've got to spend £50,000 on it refurbishing it to get the existing into a good nick, but you also maybe spend another £50,000 extending and remodeling. So you've actually bought the property for 200, but now you've spent 100,000 on it, so you're in at 300. But that property could be worth 350, 375,000, because it's not a 3-bedroom house anymore, it's now a 5-bedroom house, and they go for 350, 375, maybe 400. So refurbishment together with a remodel and or extension, bringing the property into a whole new category. Now we can make some profit, some net profit. Okay, number 4, planning permission. We did just touch on it just now when we were talking about getting planning permission for extensions, but you can actually do extensions without planning permission, formal planning permission. You can do it under certain things called permitted development. But we won't go into that now, that's for another video. But when I'm talking about planning permission creating value, you can take a property and then you can get planning permission on it, and just the fact that you've got planning permission for something, depending on what the end value of the property would be if that planning permission was later implemented. If that's a really decent value uplift, the property that you bought, let's say again for 200,000, someone might be willing to pay 220, 230, 240, 250, 300,000 pounds for the property that you haven't touched or done anything with, simply because you've got planning permission on it to do this. Now, you can't expect to make big margins on these properties if you're just getting planning permission for an extension, because these people could just go and buy another property, similar property that you've just bought, and probably without much trouble get the same type of planning permission. So they're not going to give someone tens of thousands of pounds just because they've got planning permission for an extension. But where there is opportunities is when you can, let's say, buy a property, could have a big garden, could be a semi-detached property with maybe 5 meters or more on the side, and you get planning permission to another property there. Now this is when you're going to start to make these big numbers, these sort of 50, 60, 70, 100,000 plus uplifts purely from getting the planning permission. Okay, number 5, this is another type of planning permission, but it's actually called change of use. So it's typically in the commercial arena. So let's say you buy a property that's currently an office, and then you get planning permission to turn that office into properties, residential properties. The value per square foot of a residential property is likely to be higher than the value per square foot of an office building. We're location dependent, but typically there is an uplift. So if you can just get planning permission to change the use of a building from typically from something like a commercial to residential, there's a good chance there's going to be some net value uplift in that scheme. Okay, number 6, lease extensions, short lease flats. So if you've ever seen an agent advertise a property that says cash buyers only, investors only, short lease flat. Now, typically a short lease is considered anything under 80 years. 80 years is what's called marriage value. I won't go into that now. That's a whole new video about leaseholds. But let's keep it in layman terms for now. Let's say a flat is worth 200-odd thousand if it's got a average or long lease. But once the lease drops, let's say below 80 years, it becomes a short lease flat, and now you're talking it's now the market's restricted, because once leases get too low, they're not mortgageable. In other words, mortgage lenders don't want to lend you the money to buy them. And then when that happens, the seller can't sell to all these people. They can now only sell to people who don't need a mortgage, cash buyers. So when you close your market like that, you can't expect to get the same amount of money for it, because it's just a simple, again, business rule of supply and demand. So what inevitably happens is the cash buyer will go, right, well, no one else can buy it who needs a mortgage, so I'm going to buy it cash. I'll give you £150,000 for it. And they know that the lease itself is going to cost 10, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds to extend. Again, the cost of the lease extension is determined by a few factors. One is how much is the ground rent. Two, how low is the number of years left on the lease. There's quite a few contributing factors to that. But a savvy investor will work out how much it's going to cost to extend that lease. And let's say in this example, the ground rent and the remaining term of years left on the lease makes the lease extension premium likely to cost something like £20,000. Well, if they manage to negotiate to buy the property for £150,000 and its value is £200,000 with an average or long lease, then they bought the property for £150,000. They spend £20,000 on the lease extension, so they're in at £170,000, and the property is now worth £200,000, and they can sell that to the whole market again. So they can make a £30,000 profit simply by extending the lease on a short lease flat. Just when you think it's all over, here's a bonus one for you. Number 7. So we're going back into the commercial arena now. So a little bit more complicated, but let's say you find a commercial premises and you think, do you know what, this would suit a Costa, Tesco Express, a real premium commercial tenant, but it might just have, Bob's Bits and Bobs in there, selling little bits of bric and brac, and not a particularly attractive tenant, if you like. So that tenant might be paying £10,000 a year for this premises, and the commercial agent, when they went to value the property, to say that you can buy this commercial property, it's got Bob's Bits and Bobs in here, and based on Bob's credibility as a tenant, he's paying £10,000 a year. I think this property's worth £100,000, because a commercial buy-to-let investor could come in and buy the property for £100,000. They get £10,000 a year out of Bob's Bits and Bob's rent. So it's a healthy 10% yield. But the reason the agent put it at £100,000 is because they thought, well, it's not the greatest business in the world. Bob's not part of a huge, big network. He might not sell his bits or his bobs, and he could. He's quite potentially a high-risk tenant. So investor's going to need 10%, because they've got to factor in that Bob could go at any time, and the investor actually isn't getting 10% because it's going to be empty for 6 months before he finds another Bob. So it could average out, at 5%. So that's why the agent values it at that. So you could buy this property with Bob in there for £100,000, but you think, actually, do you know what? There isn't a Costa in this town. And you might have even phoned Costa before and said, look, I've got a property coming up. Would you like a Costa in this town? And if you can get those conversations going, and maybe even a little bit further, you ask Bob to leave after you've bought the property, Costa come in. Now, if you got the property revalued, an investor's going to be really happy with Costa. Now, let's say you've managed to negotiate a 10 or a 15-year lease with Costa, no breaks. So in other words, they can't break the lease contract for 10 or 15 years. What's that worth to an investor? A nice, safe, easy tenant like that. They might go, do you know what, we're happy with 5%. So what's happened? Now that property that you bought for £100,000, you could now actually sell that property for £200,000, because an investor's going to buy it for £200,000. They're going to get £10,000 a year from Costa, which is going to give them a 5% return, which they're more than happy with, because 5%, knowing Costa in there for the next 10 or 15 years, they're happy with it. So do you see what I mean? So just by changing the tenant, you double your money. in that example. You don't always double money. Sometimes you can triple it or quadruple it. But what I'm saying is bonus strategy number 7 is change of commercial tenant. Anyway, I hope that was valuable. I hope it was useful. Reach out to me if you've got any questions on it, and look forward to catching up again in the next video. I'm David Giles. You have a good day.